Hello, this is Liberty Action Network, and I'm Al Freck, your host for the program. Tonight we have a very interesting show, something you really ought to listen closely to. We have a pension crisis in New Jersey, a public pension crisis. So if you belong to a retirement program, a New Jersey retirement program, if you're retired, if you're looking to retire, you'll want to pay close attention, because it's possible if things don't change, when you're ready to go and get your bucks, there may be no bucks. So the problem is this: how does the pension system get saved, the public pension system get saved, so that members who've been promised something in their retirement get it, and the taxpayer doesn't get crushed by having to support it? And tonight we have a very special guest who is very conversant with the issues. And her name is Erica Klemens. Let me just read you a bit about Erica. Erica is the New Jersey State Director for Americans for Prosperity, which is a right-of-center grassroots activist group. It focuses on issues of limited government, lower taxes, reducing government waste, and job-killing regulations. She's committed to building a winning grassroots army to take on special interests in Trenton and Washington, D.C. Woo. As Deputy Chief of Staff to an Assemblywoman in the New Jersey State Legislature, she has worked on the drafting and advocacy of pending legislation and managed public relations and community outreach to over 215,000 district constituents. She has been the Vice Chair to the New Jersey Young Republicans Federation in developing leadership teams in 5 New Jersey counties, and is the past Chair of the Morris County Young Republicans, where she successfully led the organization to form a political action committee, increase membership, and quadruple fundraising and support charitable causes. She also served as the Information Technology Director of the Morris County GOP. Erica, welcome to the show tonight. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you for having me, Al.
Tell us a little bit briefly about the Americans for Prosperity for people who are not familiar with them.
Sure. We're a really exciting group across the country. We have 36 state chapters, and we work with millions of activists across the country to effect positive change on public policy issues. Mainly, we deal with economic freedom issues, and with our state chapters, we focus on state policy. So that's really our base. You know, we want to go to communities, we knock on doors, we make phone calls, we work with citizens to make meetings with their legislators. Again, it's to have that direct contact with our representatives of government to see change happen.
Very good, very good. Now, the pension mess. You're familiar with it?
Yes, very.
So, give us a little background, a context, how we got to where we are, what is the pension system, and then we'll take it from there.
Sure. Well, right now in our public employee system, that includes teachers, police, anyone who works within a state department or agency. There's about 72 of them, as well as local municipalities. There are some other folks like legislative staff, which I used to be, that fall under this system. And we have about 800,000 beneficiaries right now in the state of New Jersey who are part of the system. So we used to have pensions in some industries in the private sector, but pretty much have phased them out because of cost and, you know, other reasons like freedom to invest your own money the way you want for retirement. And we still have been overpromising benefits with public employees and unfortunately not adequately funding our pension system to the point that we have almost $170 billion.
That's a billion, that's with a B.
Billion dollars in unfunded liabilities with our pension and health benefit system here in New Jersey.
Wow.
It's a monster. It's a monster. And what, you know, you talked a little bit about if you're a public employee, you should care, and you absolutely should. But if you're a taxpayer, you should care too, because that large number, right, it seems like almost unfathomable. Even when you think about the national debt, it's trillions of dollars. Well, it crowds out core functions of government that taxpayer money should be going towards, like fixing our roads, hiring teachers, having a training fund for volunteer ambulance squad members in your town, things like that. The government should be providing services for and managing. That's what taxpayer money goes to. It shouldn't be going to mortgaging out debt for future generations.
And that shortage, that underfunding, that trickles down to every town and locality.
Yes, and if
talk about crowding out.
Absolutely. And if you look at the way the systems are broken up, local municipalities have largely been doing their share of funding the system, actually. Their plan is a lot more funded than the state plan. If you go back to Governor Whitman, there was a pension holiday where they put this much into the pension fund. And again, when you have these large liabilities, you have to fund the system, right? Because all those public employees they have money taken out of their paychecks, every other week, right? That goes into a pot of money, and the state has to do its contribution.
So the regular people would know, well, if you're taking money out of your checkbook, sooner or later you have to put money back into that checkbook. Well, there's nothing there.
Right.
It sounds like somehow the state has forgotten that simple formula.
And some of that is also the way it's structured. It's what's called a defined benefit system, whereas if you're in the private sector and you have a 401k, that's considered a defined contribution system, meaning you know how much gets taken out of your paycheck, biweekly or whatever it is, and it goes into a pot. Your employer may match it, and that's invested. At the state, there's no separate pot if you're in the system for Alfrec. There's no separate pot for Eric Klemens. I can give the example, since I was a state employee, that I called the Department of Pension and Benefits and said, how much is there for me? I'm planning to leave the state. Can I take it? What should I do? And they couldn't tell me. And I said, wait. This money has been coming out of my paycheck. What do you mean you don't know? And this is a perfect example to really, to ground this, what we're talking about, that there's no single pot of money. They can't tell me because I'm too far away from retirement.
Okay.
And the current workers right now are funding the system for retirees. The money's not there to pay for people working or even soon to be retiring.
If I remember right, when that holiday took place, the contribution holiday, that's when the stock market was booming, and they said, wow, this pension is flush. All sorts of money in here. We can take a break from having to fund it, and that way we can help our state budget. We can balance our state budget.
To balance the budget, yes. And the idea is that, when times are good, that the investments, will see a better rate of return. So that was the idea. However, they over-projected those rates of return, and the stock market, we had the recession, there were other issues. We didn't get those rates of return that the state thought that they would, and the state treasurers previously. So that's where we get kicked in credit ratings by Moody's.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
So the players in this are, we know there's the taxpayer, we know there are retirees, there are union members, people who are not retired yet.
Yes.
And who else is in the politicians, the state legislature? Are they players in this too?
Yes, absolutely. So there was, if you saw recently in the news, the state Supreme Court came down with a decision basically calling Governor Christie's 2011 pension reform unconstitutional. What that means, and that was actually what he was looking for too, because since 2011, this state, according to him and some other members of the administration, have not been able to come up with that money that they had once said that they could, and step it up each year for 7 years to a full pension payment, statutorily required. Now, the court said having a statutorily required amount is not a contract, which is what the unions wanted the court to say, that it's a contract, you have to. The court said, no, only the legislature can act in this.
Wow. So that's
in the weeds. That's in the weeds for you.
Okay, yeah, it's a lot to digest, but I think most people, to simplify it, would say, look, is there going to be money there for me when I retire? Because I'm planning on that, and they promised me.
Right.
Well, what if nothing gets done? But let's just say the worst scenario. Legislature doesn't act. What happens?
Right now, and what we're expecting either tomorrow or early next week, the budget will pass with a smaller pension payment of about $1.3 billion. That's short of the $3.1 billion that we were looking at. And by the way, a lot shorter than what actuaries say, too.
Which is what?
It's a lot more than that. Several $billion more.
Several $1 billion more.
Yes, and just a little bit of background. To get to that $3.1 billion, the state would have to cut about 5% from its budget tomorrow. It's not happening. But in theory, what other states do is they have a sliding rule with their budget. So say they have $35 billion, right, to work with. And you have all the departments and agencies, and you have Medicaid and all the other programs that you need to fund. They prioritize them. So essentially, when you get down to the bottom, that lowest 5% is not going to be funded. And it forces the budget officers to make priorities. So what happens if we don't do this? There's roughly about $70 billion in the system right now that will be funding, partially the baby boomer generation. But what this is essentially a Ponzi scheme where the current workers are paying for today's retirees and just a little bit after. It's something that we have to deal with because the Supreme Court has said previously that we have to honor our obligations to public employees. And that's real. So that's a real issue. And what will probably happen, unless there's some, pension hero, which AFP has been looking for a leader in the legislature to take action on this, is it's going to crowd more and more out of the budget to the point that we won't be able to fix our roads. We won't be able to hire the teachers that we need. And other very necessary programs are going to be cut.
And then people will say, but we're paying taxes.
Right.
How come we're getting less and less services?
We're paying on the debt.
Yeah.
The high property taxes that we see here in northern New Jersey particularly.
Wow. Yeah. Well. The other states have had these problems.
Yes.
Right? Some have not done well in handling it. Others have done better. Some have done, in terms of cutting down the underfunding. I mean, putting more money into it. They find ways to do it, and it's not just cutting the budget.
Right.
What are some of the lessons that have been learned from successful states that have done pretty well? What have they done?
Sure. Well, the biggest thing overall is cut the bleeding that we're doing, right? If we're over-promising on benefits, we can't afford the system we have, we need to change the system for new employees. So starting from today, if we implemented a 401k style plan for new employees, or even the Pension and Health Benefit Commission here in New Jersey offered a cash balance hybrid system, a little bit similar to that, that would be great moving forward because we would at least stop digging the hole, right? Stop digging the hole. And it's not actually unheard of. The federal government does that. We're close to Picatinny Arsenal here. New employees have 401k style plans.
What's the hybrid? You mentioned hybrid. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, it's a cross between defined benefit and defined contribution plan. So it would be freezing the current system that we have and creating a new system.
And defined benefit is that you get a benefit, you know what it's going to be, and it stays that way forever. Isn't that the defined benefit?
Right. You have that benefit no matter what you contribute. So
Okay.
if you contribute less or more, depending on your job, you'll always have that benefit.
Okay.
Whereas defined contribution, what you put into the system is what's there to be invested plus any employer match.
Okay.
It's a lot more straightforward too. And also some of the advantages of a system like that is, say you leave the state or a public job, you can take that money when you leave. You can roll it into another 401k. You have some more freedom in your investments.
Okay, so you control that money.
Right.
Right.
And at Americans for Prosperity, we're for economic freedom and people making their own choices what they do with the money. I certainly don't trust the state of New Jersey with my money.
Right.
They've mismanaged it.
You're not buying Jersey bonds? I don't understand that. Okay. Well, okay, I interrupted you, but you were talking about some of the things that we've learned from successful states, and you mentioned the hybrid. And
Yes.
what are some of the other things that we've learned from
Sure.
them?
We have to audit the pension funds. And actually, one of the pension boards called for an audit this year. It's been a little bit controversial, but essentially looking at the performance fees that we're paying to the investment managers, right? Since it's taxpayer money, it's your money, it's my money, right? It's coming out from our taxes. It should be a transparent process, and we should know where that money's going, right? The percentages of the performance fees. And
Let me
that's not
guess.
transparent at this point.
The performance fees are fairly large,
They are
right?
very large.
How did I guess that?
Right.
Yeah.
We're talking millions and millions of dollars going to investment managers. And hey, if they're doing a good job, right, that may be well worth it. But at this point, the process isn't transparent. So even the pension board really can't evaluate it.
Anything else that some successful states are doing, other kinds of approaches that they've taken that we know about?
A lot of it's even messaging. So we work with the Reason Foundation, and we had a press conference, as you know, on June 11 with Dr. Adrian Moore. He's the vice president there at the foundation. And he's an economist who works with legislators in other states who have had successful pension reform. And some of it's the messaging, right? It's the political will that we really need here in New Jersey. We need someone to take a stand. We did have Assemblyman Declan O'Scanlan, who's a budget officer with us, and he's a great partner.
Right.
But what things that Dr. Moore can do is connect our legislators with legislators from other states and really giving them the encouragement, some of the messaging to use. Since we have a very strong union presence here in New Jersey, there are certainly going to be some controversial voices, right? And having a rational discussion with people, really sitting at the table together.
Yeah.
And having a meaningful conversation, just getting that political will is the biggest battle of all.
You mentioned the voices. I was thinking about that. We have if we were to put voices to the various players, you have the union leadership and members. You have retirees who are already in retirement. You have the political people in the legislature. And you have the taxpayers.
Right.
What are the voices you would put to each of those? If we could do a sentence on each of those.
Wow.
Yeah, I know it's tough, but
The largest voice, by far, hands down, is the union. The unions here in New Jersey. We have one of the strongest union presences in the entire nation. Probably rivals California, actually.
wow.
And for your listeners who maybe are learning about this process, the General Assembly is up every 2 years. The Senate alternating years, 4 years, and then depending on redistricting. So you have this group of legislators that's always running and always accepting campaign checks from unions. Now, not everyone does, but some of these checks might be in the $6,000 range, less or more. Some of the races that we look at, the unions may dump 20,000, even more than that. So when you think about it, who are our representatives in government beholden to? Is it the taxpayer? How much can you offer to their campaign?
They're influenced by those contributions? I can't believe it. It's like amazing. Well,
it's reality, though, right?
It is reality.
And if the public, right, is educated on what's really happening, and this is not all legislators, but many of them, right, they're receiving those checks. If they spoke out against those unions, they would not see those checks anymore.
Right. They
You
wouldn't
know?
see the votes either coming through in the district.
Not those votes, but you know what? There are certain legislators, like my former boss, Assemblyman Carroll, who don't rely on checks like that. You know, they stand on principle,
Right.
and he's been reelected many times.
Right.
You know, so you can do that.
So we have the union. And that, what's the if you could put a sentence in the voice of the taxpayer, what are they saying?
They're not saying anything, unfortunately.
Oh gosh.
Yeah, that's
Gosh. That's
there's
sad.
at least with this public pension crisis, right, we really need a large-scale education effort that this is not just about public employees, but the taxpayers who fund it. And I would say the biggest thing that they need to know, and even what I've heard anecdotally people talking about, is, well, they should contribute more, and we should change the system because I'm not collecting a pension. I have a 401k, or, you know, they may even have IRAs and other ways of investing for their retirement, and so the public wants to see a change.
Yeah. It does seem that there is this challenge and this dynamic tension between keep the promises and don't crush the taxpayer. That's a challenge. How do you see that working out?
It's absolutely a challenge, and that's why that slider rule, just that, you know, on principle, right, if we made our pension commitment this year for the budget, we'd have to cut 5%. And guess what? That's not very popular, right? If you're serving in the legislature, to have to cut programs. However, there's plenty to cut and room for cost savings, but it takes work, right? It takes work going through the budget hearings, the departments, the agencies. Where can we find savings?
I know
It's doable.
I know hearing from taxpayers, they would say, you can't save 5%? There's not 5% in there somewhere that's wasted? How about pencils? How many pencils do you need? You know,
How
I'm
about-
making it,
yeah.
I'm joking a bit, but people
Right.
are saying, you're telling me you can't cut stuff in there? Nobody can find anything?
Right. Do you remember the open space tax? That ballot initiative that we
Explain
saw.
that to our folks.
Sure. So last year there was a ballot initiative back in November that the public passed to increase the tax on businesses to fund open space money, which on the surface is supposed to fund parks, right, and recreation areas for New Jersey. However, you know, having spent some time in the legislature and done the research on where this money is going, it's not going to that.
What?
Even things like historic preservation, I'll give you some examples. Churches. We've seen some of the money go to replace stained glass windows in churches under the guise of historic preservation.
Oh, okay.
Or some of the money has been spent on buying up wetlands that could never be developed. But the idea is for the state of New Jersey to acquire more and more land so that none of it can be developed. But what you'll find is that some of that goes to politically connected developers, right? So, you know, when we talk about some of these programs that are put forth, there's money there, right? But we need a better way of messaging it, right? We're not cutting money from parks or the park
Right.
system.
Right.
We want to cut money from wasteful programs.
What I'm hearing is really the public needs to pay attention, but they're not being helped in transparency to understand. People look at the open space and they're like, well, gee, that'll be good. That'll keep things greener. That'll give us
Right.
more space. We won't be crowded. We won't have an encroaching urban building in our area. That's why we moved out to the suburbs. This will
Right.
help that. But what I'm hearing is that isn't necessarily where the money's going.
Yeah, and a lot of these bills that the legislature passes, they may have some great name, some fluffy name. That's not where the money goes.
Right.
And you know what? The media doesn't necessarily translate some of what's really going on, or it requires actually a lot of work, like through Open Public Records Act, for concerned taxpayers like yourself to do a little investigating.
Is that where AFP comes in? Some of this investigating in that, right?
Absolutely,
right.
you know, and accountability efforts, right? So we are the #1 watchdog here in New Jersey, and we're a nonpartisan group, right? We look at both sides of the aisle. Where can we better serve the taxpayers?
Right.
And again, so regular folks can do more with the money that they make, right? I mean, the money that comes out of people's paycheck, I think they could better spend that on their own.
Now, we're running short on time, so maybe what you can do is, well, I would say this. It sounds like people need to support AFP in whatever way they can, because you are, as you say, the watchdog for the people. Right? You have a website that people can go to,
Yes.
and you can just mention that. And
Yes, it's afpnewjersey.com, and on our website you'll find everything we're up to, what's been in the news. We have action alerts where regular people can go on, see what's passing through the legislature so you don't have to do the legwork on that. And we have forms set up. We have an ambassador program if you're interested in getting more involved. We're going to be running some trainings later this summer, and we're opening up a community center in about a month up here in northern New Jersey.
wow, that's great. Well, Erica, thanks for coming in. It's been very useful and very informative. And folks, thanks for tuning in also. This is Liberty Action Network. For more, go to studentsforabetterfuture.com. And thanks again. We'll see you soon.